The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
I'm horror author T. Fox Dunham.
And I'm horror author and filmmaker Phil Thomas.
And tonight we're asking you,
what are you afraid of?
This is T. Fox Dunham, host of What Are You Afraid of Horror and Paranormal Show on Para X Radio. We have a special show for you this evening. Last year, we did an Irish ghost story episode called Banshees. It was a short little episode. We were experimenting with time lengths. And this year, we've decided to bring back that show, yet we've added a half an hour of new content, mostly traditional Irish ghost stories. Some remarkable stuff. We present it to you, especially to our Para X Radio audience, in celebration of one of the greatest cultures and the most beautiful storytelling traditions that human races have produced, that of the British Isles and especially Ireland. This is T. Fox Dunham, and we bring to you tonight a variety of ghost stories taken from modern times and legends read by myself and Phil Thomas, and of course the lovely version of Molly Malone, sung by British folk singer David Walton. So, settle back with an Irish coffee, or something a little stronger, perhaps, a wee bit of whiskey, and enjoy the old tales of a wet and cold land, rich with banshees, ghosts, and the devil. And this is episode 39, Banshees Revisited, on What Are You Afraid of Horror and Paranormal Show on Para X Radio at Friday nights at 9 o'clock. Check out the website at www.whatareyoufraidofpodcast.com for more information and links to other shows. Du hadol, everyone. Enjoy.
Your source for everything paranormal. Para X.
And we're back. This is Phil
This is Fox
of What Are You Afraid Of? Entitled Banshees.
for St. Patrick's Day. Ireland National Day.
Yes.
For the Irish population, but we get a lot more from Ireland and just, a large portion of the United States we get some great ghost stories.
We do.
So we had to do an Irish episode.
Yeah, we've been doing holiday-themed episodes pretty much up until this point.
Right.
So
That's what up. So do you have any plans for St. Patrick's Day? I imagine you do.
Well, I think I'm going to an Irish pub. I'm not sure which one. I usually go to one every St. Patrick's Day. A couple of friends and I might be going, having some, green beer.
Right.
And that's it. Maybe have a couple beers.
Right.
Nothing crazy.
Low-key, yeah.
Maybe get some corned beef and cabbage or something.
Oh, that's really good.
A lot of the Irish places, restaurants and pubs, they've got like that on special.
Mm-hmm. Tell some of these ghost stories.
Yes.
We're coming. Great ghost story tonight. It's actually one that happened to me and my wife while we were honeymooning. We spent a couple of days in Ireland, and it's called The Honeymoon Intruder. And then we have a great interview with Shawn Macomber, who is a great author. He's a contributor to places like Morgue magazine and Fangoria. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about some Irish folklore and legend, and then David Walton returns tonight with one of my favorite Irish ghost songs, and just a catchy tune that I'm sure all of you have heard at some point in your life, Molly Malone. So what do you think? Should we start with the ghost story?
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay, so this is The Honeymoon Intruder, and this is me and my wife reading it. So, enjoy.
Honeymoon Intruder. May 2015, Dublin, Ireland. In May 2015, I had the amazing fortune and joy to marry my then fiancée Alison in Edinburgh, Scotland, the home country of my family, the Humes. We had a beautiful ceremony on one of the few days of pleasant weather in a country known for its constant drizzle and soggy moors. We married at Prestonfield House, an old house of spirits in itself, and began a honeymoon through Great Britain and Ireland.
On the second day, we left Scotland and flew to Dublin, Ireland, to spend 2 days in the city and countryside. Our flight landed in the middle of a rainstorm. The wind was crazy. I'd never seen anything like it. Of course, I've never been in a hurricane. We took refuge at the inn where we were staying, an old house in the old part of the city, which also had a restaurant and pub. After trying to walk around the city, we returned soaked and miserable to hide in our room. My husband and I ordered Indian takeout and put our clothes out to dry under a fan.
We curled up in a bed, a happy couple, and tried to sleep. It didn't take long for Alison to be out, but I wasn't used to the new place. I'd heard people passing in the hall through the latter evening, and it distracted me. Close to midnight, I listened to footsteps draw closer, loud enough to be someone in the room. I turned away from the door to try to ignore it, but the footsteps sounded even closer. Then, I felt a pressure on that side of the bed, as if somebody was pressing down on the mattress. I turned over fast to yell at whatever drunkard had wandered into our room and planned to complain about the quality of the locks. No one was there, and the door was secure.
I woke up to find my husband leaning up and looking over the room. Something had upset him. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't want to freak me out, and just said he had heard a noise. It wasn't until later he told me what had happened. I shrugged. It was an old place and probably had a lot of spirits.
Completely nonchalant, I'm telling you folks.
My name is Greg Bakken. I'm a writer, a producer, and a paranormal investigator. My favorite way of communicating with spirits is through using the spirit box, also known as a ghost box. I invite you to listen to me every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Central for interviews with people in the paranormal community and beyond. Plus, I will also include as much of my spirit box evidence as I can during my show. My name is Greg. Can you say Greg? Can you say Jeff? Greg. Jeff. Join me every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Central Time for Minnesota Ghost Box, only on ParaX Radio.
Mercy, a new horror medical thriller from author T. Fox Dunham, published by Bloodbound Books. Based on the author's horrific battle with a rare form of lymphoma that involved intense chemotherapy and radiation, Fox turns the horror of his experience into terror on the page.
William Saint is dying of cancer. On most days, death seems like a humane alternative to the treatment. Stricken with fever, William is rushed to Mercy, notorious as a place to send the sickest of the poor and uninsured to be forgotten, and finds the hospital in even worse condition than his previous visit.
Willie's memories faded. He grabbed his sack head of the scarecrow, picking at the exposed chicken wire to hold them in. However, the memories fell out of the holes in his face. They wormed and crawled from the leather flesh and the old clothing of the scarecrow, then squirmed and wiggled down his body.
The grounds are unkempt, the foundation is cracking, and like the wild mushrooms sprouting from the fissures of decay around it, something is growing inside the hospital. Something dark.
Fangoria gives Mercy 3.5 out of 4 skulls. Dunham has channeled his many brushes with the other side into the exquisitely rendered, lyrical, supernatural hospital thriller Mercy.
It's feeding on the sickness and sustaining itself on the staff, changing them, and now it wants Willie.
Come now, Mr. Saint. Just a little more of that sweet milk. So salty and so good. You won't miss it. And we ever do so like our delicacies here at Mercy Hospital.
Part medical horror, part supernatural suspense, Mercy is a hard-hitting fever dream of a novel. I enjoyed the hell out of it. Tim Wagner, author of The Way of All Flesh and Eat the Night. Available from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and bookstores everywhere in both print and digital versions.
Life is an addiction.
Let go. Let it all burn.
A reading from Mercy, a horror novel by T. Fox Dunham, released by Bloodbound Books on March 30th for National Doctors' Day. Ebook now available on Amazon.com. The Dark Heart in the Garden. Willie tripped over a pile of bodies and hit the wall. The rank odor confirmed his suspicion about the pile's origins. Putrefied slime soaked his gown and irritated his skin. He rubbed on the burning spots, smearing it down his body. He vomited. The aroma choked him, but gradually he adjusted and found his breath. He slipped on the puddles of decayed people, then peeled off the shredded socks and tossed them at the wall. Willie panicked and dropped the sea salt. He turned on the flashlight, scanned the floor, and searched for the first layer of bones at the bottom of the mass. The arms and femurs collapsed under his hands, devoured to powder, but with luck he found the vial. He wiped it off on his robes and held it tight. It appeared the hospital stopped processing their cadavers and just piled them up in the fashion of a hoarder. He wondered if it was intended or just lassitude. Was the hospital even open? There was no way a county board of health would ever allow a functioning hospital to create such an affront to hygiene. Willie knew that if a place could get away with it, it would be Mercy. So many of their patients were alone or had apathetic families, friends. Kylie was all he had, and once he got cancer, his friends slowly pulled away from him. No one would want to look for the missing dead. No one wanted to be stuck with a funeral bill. So Mercy could operate with impunity. This was a hospital for the lost and dispossessed. The administration hadn't even bothered to bury the bodies. The temple just devoured them like it devoured him. No one would notice his missing grave. Not one soul would kneel by his memorial stone and pray. Willie pulled himself up to his feet on a broken gurney stacked against the wall and found perch on the pipes lining the claustrophobic passages. Hospital equipment in various states of disrepair littered the hall, old carts, wheelchairs, and hospital beds. Vines grew on the walls, intertwining with the pipes, and the black bronze absorbed the light from his flashlight. Grown mold carpeted the floor and the tight path around the remains, and he stepped carefully on the spongy growth. It sucked down his toes like mud, and he had to yank his feet out to walk over the limbs sprawled in the hall, holding onto the slippery pipes in the wall to give him balance. The mass moved to his body, responding to the pressure, his presence, and when he stood still, it slurped to the cadence of his pulse. He passed a boiler room and looked inside to find a rusty metal tank marked natural gas. The valves had been sealed and diverted, probably to a system above ground since this floor had been sealed off. Red pipes led down the hall and into the ceiling from the gas reservoir. Willie moved on. He passed a boiler room and looked inside to find a rusty metal tank marked natural gas. The valves had been sealed and diverted, probably to a system above ground since the floor had been sealed off. Red pipes led down the hall and into a ceiling from the gas reservoir. Willie moved on. The hall sweated and it joined his fever. He found the weakness and pressed through. Pain throbbed down his back, at first quick, but he ignored it, focusing instead on the shadow masses gathering in the various storage rooms. Dark snakes slithered from the spaces and reached for him like desperate lovers, alone and cast off. He knew such spirit and had fallen to his knees at her grave, at the plot he paid for where they buried nothing and named a mound of dirt Kylie. The shadows reached him, caressing his skin, cooling the heat and chilling the beads of sweat collecting on his limbs. Each touch injected melancholy into his spirit, and he slowed his climb to the mold carpet. The shadow grew mouths, and the mouths whispered just below the ambient noise of the chugging boiler, though Willie couldn't determine whether the voice was just in his head. Nothing lies beyond the door. Lie here with us. I have to continue. This has been a reading of my novel Mercy, coming out from Bloodbound Books. It is a metaphor for the suffering and violation that I underwent while going through chemo and radiation for lymphoma. Out on Amazon.com, March 30th for Doctor's Day. Pre-order ebook now. A selection of Irish ghost stories. Wallstone Castle, read by T. Fox Dunham. Located in the River Auberg Valley in County Cork, the ruins of Wallstone Castle give no indication to its bloody past. The castle was burned to the ground during the Irish Confederate Wars, and most of its occupants butchered. This is one of the most famous Irish ghost stories. One of the occupants that was spared was Colonel Wall, the family head, but he was imprisoned and eventually died in Cork Gaol. One who was not so lucky was Henry Bennet, a loyal soldier to Kilnerwall, and a defender of the castle who was killed during the siege. It is said his ghost still roams the ruins. A gentleman who lived in the vicinity of Alston Castle was said to have seen the ghost of Harry Bennet wearing his full Cavalier period dress, carrying a pole that he used in the past to stop travelers from entering the castle property. Whenever the traveler would ask him to withdraw the pole, Henry would laugh heartily and withdraw the pole. The same gentleman who saw him carrying the pole said that later Henry would come to his window and push the pole through. Then he would scream at him to remove the pole and go away, and then he would do so, with a hearty laugh. This were the ghosts of Alston Castle.
Allison is so nonchalant about these things.
Right.
I didn't tell her because we needed to spend another night in the room before flying out.
You didn't tell her right away?
I didn't mention it. Like, she kind of knew something had happened, but, Allison at night, she's like, oh, the King Kong just busted through the roof. Okay, tell him to turn off the light. She's like that when she goes to sleep. So, and I have so much trouble sleeping.
Right.
You wonder how many of these ghost encounters we have in our sleep.
Yeah, you don't even know.
But she's nonchalant, so nonchalant about it. And then, I told her when we were in London, which is another great place for ghosts, and she's just kind of like, really? Okay. That was it.
That was it, really? Okay.
She's just, it's not that she doesn't believe in these things. She does. She's just very accepting of this natural world.
Right.
So Ireland has some great ghost stories.
Yes, it does.
And it's such an old history. And two of my favorite of the ghost stories, and you'll remember some of the Irish movies like Darby O'Gill and the Little People.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that Disney?
I do.
They featured a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And two of them were the Banshee and the Coach Devour. And the Banshee is actually, I speak Gaelic. It's a variation of the term Ban, B-A-N, space, S-I-D-H-E, she, Banshee, or bad fairy.
Okay.
So these things are demonic or ghost-like. They're considered fae or fairy. And just when Catholicism took over, it converted them into... And now we say Banshee based on the phonetic pronunciation.
Right, okay.
Phil, you're going to start us off a little bit about the Banshee.
It's called Banshees in the Coach.
Banshees in the Coach. Phil and I have drawn from some online sources and our personal experiences and history, collecting folklore and legends, and we're going to tell you a little bit about the Banshee and the Coach.
Yeah, I mean, apparently the Banshee's method of foretelling death in olden times differed from that adapted by her at the present day. Now she wails and wrings her hands, but in the old Irish tales, she washed human heads and limbs, blood-stained clothes, till the water is all dyed with human blood, usually before a battle. So over time, her characteristics and methods have changed.
As often legends do.
Exactly. So she appears differently from story to story.
Right.
Sometimes young and beautiful or old, with a terrifying aspect. One writer describes her as a tall, thin woman with uncovered head and long hair that floated around her shoulders, attired in something which seemed either a loose white cloak or a sheet thrown hastily around her, uttering piercing cries. Or she has been seen as a coachman waiting in the yard. She seemed to be a very small woman with blue eyes, long white hair, and wearing a red cloak.
Indeed. Collecting some of the old legends that have come out over the last few hundred years, we got one from... obviously, we didn't get one directly. I mean, we don't have a medium on call, though we'd like one. If there are any mediums out there who want to come work for us to contact the dead, send us an email at whatareyoufraidof117gmail.com. But this is from Mr. T.J. Westrop, who tells a variation of a family encounter with the Banshee. And he goes on to say, my maternal grandmother heard the following tradition from her mother, one of the Miss Ross Lewins, who witnessed this occurrence. Their father, Mr. Harrison Ross Lewin, was away in Dublin on law business, and in his absence the young people went off to spend the evening with a friend who lived some miles away. The night was fine and lightsome as they were returning, save at one point, where the road ran between trees or high hedges not far to the west of the old church of Kilchrist. The latter, like many similar ruins, was a simple oblong building with long side walls and high gables, and at that time it and its graveyard were unenclosed and lay in the open fields. As the party passed down the long, dark lane, they suddenly heard in the distance a loud keening and a clapping of hands. And the country people there were accustomed to do when they heard the lamenting of the dead. They hurried on and came in sight of the church to protect them. And again, this is a very you see that connection between Christianity and the old pagan beliefs. Right. And when they came up there on the side wall, they saw a little gray-haired old woman clad in a dark cloak. And she was running to and fro, chanting and wailing and throwing up her arms. And the family became very frightened, and the men rushed forward and surrounded the ruin, and the two of them went into the church, and the apparition vanished from the wall as they did so. And they searched and could not find it. But when they looked outside the windows, they saw a huge raven with fiery eyes lit on the sill, and it tapped on the glass 3 times and vanished. That came from 1776, and this is, and I just want to make this connection for you guys. This is the connection to the Kalyak, or the goddess of death. These are old legends that have variations, and the Banshee is always the foreteller of death. Right. So the raven, the old-haired lady, it's all the Kalyak, and this raven of mortality that terrifies the living, especially in these centuries with poor medicine and hygiene. Yeah.
A lady of County Cork, with a family of English descent, tells 2 experiences of a banshee in her family. My mother, when a young girl, was standing looking out of the window in their house at Blackrock near Cork. She suddenly saw a white figure standing on a bridge, which was easily visible from the house. The figure waved her arms toward the house, and my mother heard the bitter wailing of the banshee. It lasted some seconds, and then the figure disappeared. Next morning, my grandfather was walking as usual into the city of Cork. He accidentally fell, hit his head against the curbstone, and never recovered consciousness.
Incredible. So again, very much the portent of death is the Banshee. In March 1900, my mother was very ill, and one evening the nurse and I were with her arranging her bed. We suddenly heard the most extraordinary wailing, which seemed to come in waves around and under her bed. We naturally looked everywhere to try and find the cause, but in vain. The nurse and I looked at one another, but made no remark, as my mother did not seem to hear it. My sister was downstairs sitting with my father. She heard it and thought some terrible thing had happened to her little boy, who was in bed upstairs. She rushed up and found him sleeping quietly. My father did not hear it. In the house next door they heard it, and ran downstairs thinking something had happened to the servant. But the latter at once said to them, "Did you hear the Banshee, Miss P? She must be dying." So another favorite story of mine is the headless coach. They're always seen, too, as harbingers of death. And they're much like banshees, where they come, and usually on the night when the banshee's wailing. And a lot of the legends say that they've come to bring your souls to the next realm. At a house in County Limerick, writes again Mr. T.G. Westrop, occurred the remarkably attested apparition of the headless coach in June 1806, when Mr. Ralph Wastrop, my great-grandfather, lay dying. The story was told by his sons, John, William, and Ralph, to their respective children, who told it to me. They had sent for the doctor, and were waiting his arrival in the dusk. As they sat on the steps, they suddenly heard a heavy rumbling, and saw a huge, dark coach drive into the paved court before the door. One of them went down to meet the doctor, but the coach swept past him, and drove down the avenue, which went straight between the fences and hedges to the gate. 2 of the young men ran after the coach, which they could hear rumbling before them, and suddenly came full tilt against the avenue gate. The noise had stopped, and they were surprised at not finding the carriage. The gate proved to be locked, and when they at last awoke the lodge-keeper, he showed them the keys under his pillow. The doctor arrived a little later, but could do nothing, and the sick men died a few hours afterwards. So usually harbingers of death.
Yes.
The Banshee and the coach.
That was good.
You know, and I'll always remember Darby O'Gill and the Little People as the coach pulls up and the door opens and that great Disney tactical, you know, special effects. Before the days of computers, where the door would just open through a thread and the headless puppet or whatever it was reached out with a whip and said, "Darby O'Gill, get in."
Yeah.
And he was riding him off to the netherworld.
And you said you watched that as a kid.
As a kid, it had a lot of effect on me.
Did it?
You know,
what was your initial impression of that?
Just this terror and the wonder that comes from terror. You know, and this love and entrance into all things fey and mystical.
Yeah, I love it. So one of my favorite is the Sleepy Hollow.
There you
Disney,
go.
The Disney Sleepy Hollow cartoon. Have you ever seen it?
Oh, of course.
It's the old animation. I think it's narrated by Bing Crosby.
Right.
In the 50s, I believe. That's a great one. I watched that as a kid. It had a huge impact.
Another effect on you.
Yeah.
Right, same kind of effect. Yeah. You know, had the Horseman terrified me growing up.
I taped it off TV, and as an adult, I bought it on DVD, and I own it. So, you know, it's something I watch every Halloween. You know,
with good reason.
Well, yeah, with good reason. Yeah. So
Shawn Macomber.
Yeah.
Is on the show as part of the Dark Five.
That's right. And why do you call him the Dark Five?
Oh, it's something I made up. So Shawn Macomber, incredible guy. Here's my interview with him. I'm speaking to another one of the Dark Ones tonight, a fascinating man and talented author, Shawn Macomber. How are you today, Shawn? Feeling pretty dark?
Yeah, sure. It's pretty dark.
So tell us a little about yourself. What you're writing for, what you're doing these days. I know you've been traveling a lot recently.
Well, actually, I don't travel as much as I used to. I used to do overseas reporting, and I covered a couple presidential elections, and just generally, if I felt like something, was going on, I would go. Oh, Selena Gomez is trying to get out the vote in Glendale, California. Let me get on a plane. That sort of thing. And it was great, and it was a lot of fun, and I saw a lot of interesting things, and I met, a very diverse array of people, and blah blah blah. It was good for my development as a human being. But it's just really not for me anymore. I sort of regret chasing every lead in those days. It was sort of a solid decade of doing that. And, at the time, I was younger and I felt like, I had endless supply of life to live, and now, my wife and I have been together 15 years, and, my pug is 14 years old, and I'm realizing now more than I did then the value of life and sort of the limited resource that it is. And so I don't go on the road in the same way. If something that I really felt would advance my understanding of existence, or was a good opportunity that might move my career forward in a certain way, then I would do that kind of travel again, but not just as a matter of course like I did before. Essentially I love my wife, I love my kid, I love my dogs, I love my home life too much to make those sort of sacrifices anymore without a really good reason. As far as like what I do, I sort of like my Gray Matter Press bio starts off, that I'm a writer and noted pug wrangler in the New York City area, and that's sort of what I aspire to. If people have heard of me at all, especially people who listen to this podcast, they might have seen me in Fangoria, where I'm a regular in print and online for the last several years. I write a lot for Shock Till You Drop, which is now run by Chris Alexander, who was the editor-in-chief over at Fangoria for a long time, up until last year. I've done work for Morgue, so that's kind of all in that zone. And then I write a lot about music. I write a lot about heavy metal, especially death metal and black metal for Decibel magazine, which is sort of America's #1 heavy metal magazine. I also write for Magnet, which is more indie rock, and then I've done stuff for, a lot of the bigger rock music sites like Stereo Gum and other outlets like that. So in the past I've written a lot of political essays. Right now, my niche is sort of writing about darker stuff, both in music and film, and it sort of dovetails nicely with the fiction work I try and do.
It was a thrill to be included in my second anthology with Grey Matter Press, Savage Beasts. What made this anthology different, and what was your story in it, and the source of its inspiration?
Yeah, my story, Pestilence by Bimar, inspired by the Dutch death metal band Pestilence and their album Consuming Impulse from, I think, 1989, or it could have been 90 or 91, somewhere in that range, in the classic death metal era, is in Savage Beasts, the Grey Matter Press anthology that's dedicated to music. And, I'm really happy to be a part of that anthology because, not just because Anthony and Sharon, the two editors over at Grey Matter Press, the primary people, not just because they put out so much wonderful stuff in such a short amount of time, but also because while there's been a lot of there have been a lot of great horror music themed anthologies, I feel like this one has fewer boundaries, and I like the fact that a story inspired by Pestilence, a death metal band, can be in there alongside stories about classical music and Tom Petty and Nine Inch Nails and all these things. It's just a really diverse, interesting group of writers and a really diverse, interesting group of inspirations, and I'm just really happy to be a part of it.
The name of your story, its source, and the line that you want to read for us tonight.
It's Pestilence by Bimar, and it's, as I said, it's a story based on Pestilence, the Dutch death metal band's album Consuming Impulse, which I think is maybe 1989. My lavender-scented uber pesticide does possess a certain green chic flair. What could be more organic than cannibalism, really?
It's been remarkable speaking to you, Shawn, and I look forward to having you back on the show to talk about your work, your life, and just your views of life and death. Thank you for coming on.
They're creepy and they're kooky, mysterious and spooky. They all talk gobbledygooky, the Para-X family. The shows are paranormal, not stuffy but informal. The topics are abnormal, the Para-X family.
They're strange, deranged, unrestrained.
So grab your favorite brew, it's time to rendezvous as we give awards to the Para-X family.
Two Tales of Sightings After Death, from Irish Folklore, read by Phil Thomas. First story, Colonel Q. I was sitting in the same chair I am in at present one evening, when I heard a knock at the front door. I went myself to see who was there, and on opening the door, saw my old friend PQ, standing outside with his gun in his hand. I was surprised at seeing him, but asked him to come in and have something. He came inside the porch into the lamplight and stood there for a few moments. Then he muttered something about being sorry he had disturbed me, and that he was on his way to see his brother, Colonel Q, who lived about a mile further on. Without any further explanation, he walked away towards the gate into the dusk. I was greatly surprised and perplexed, but as he had gone, I sat down again by the fire. About an hour later, another knock came to the door, and I again went on to see who was there. On opening it, I found PQ's groom holding a horse, and he asked me where he was, as he had missed his way in the dark and did not know the locality. I told him and then asked him where he was going and why, and he replied that his master was dead at his own house about 9 miles away, and that he had been sent to announce the news to Colonel Q. Story 2. He is at the door. Miss Gren of Gren Park County, Tipperary, relates a story which was told her by the late Miss, sister of a former dean of Cashel. The latter, an old lady, stated that one time she was staying with a friend in a house in the suburbs of Dublin. In front of the house was the usual grass plot, divided into two by a short gravel path which led down to a gate and opened on the street. She and her friend were one day engaged in needlework in one of the front rooms, when they heard the gate opening, and on looking out the window they saw an elderly gentleman of their acquaintance coming up the path. As he approached the door, both exclaimed, "Oh, how good of him to come and see us!" And he was not shown into the sitting room. One of them rang the bell and said to the maid when she appeared, "You have not let Mr. So-and-so in. He is at the door for some little time." The maid went to the hall door and returned to say that there was no one there. Next day, they learnt that he had died, just at the hour that they had seen him coming up the path.
We've all experienced messages from beyond the silver veil, whether we want to admit it or not. Some people take no notice, ignoring these outreaches. Others embrace them, seeing them as evidence of an expanded universe. Whether these stories frighten or comfort, we are reassured.
The mission of What Are You Afraid Of? Horror and Paranormal Show is to explore the dark side through paranormal investigation, folklore, and the arts. The show is an audio magazine. We share true ghost stories, dark fiction, interviews with ghost hunters and indie authors, filmmakers, artists, and musicians. We discuss industry issues and offer support. We have a unique and varied theme that creates a show unlike others.
Our weekly show is featured on all major podcast services, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, and YouTube. We are a part of ParaX Radio.
We need your true ghost experiences, so write them down in an email, preferably under 2,000 words, which comes to about 3 or 4 typed pages, and send them to whatareyouafraidof117@gmail.com. Please don't attach them as a file. And don't worry about trying to write like Charles Dickens. Just tell us your story as if you were telling a friend. And if you're not sure if it's actually a ghost story or not, but it's still weird, send it anyway. Also send us your photos, EVPs, recipes, your thoughts, and any artwork.
Check out our website at www.whatareyouafraidofpodcast.com for our ghost story archives, articles, photos, and expanded material. And you can buy t-shirts, mugs, laptop covers, and animals apparently with our logo on it. Follow us at Twitter at PFWhatAfraidOf. That's PFWhatAfraidOf.
You cannot escape the darkness, so explore it with us now at
What Are You Afraid Of?
The Irish Vampire, taken from Irish folklore. read by T. Fox Dunham. This is the legend concerning the Vampire King of Ireland. Abertach. Many years ago, there lived in the lands east of the Foyle, between Dungavan and Gava, in the Glen of the Eagle, or the Glenullen, a chieftain or petty king called Abertach. His name implies that he was small or a dwarf. It may be that he had been injured in battle, or through accident, or possibly because of wizardry, for the people of his time were great warriors, and they liked their rulers to be manly, brave, and strong. However, this is conjecture, and all we know of him is that he was quite an evil man, a wizard even, hated and feared by his own clan and neighboring clans. Thus is the story of the death of Abertach. Abertach was a jealous man, and suspected that his wife was having an affair, so he decided to spy on her. He climbed out the window of his castle one night in an effort to catch her in the act, but slipped and fell to his death. His body was discovered in the morning, and his people, relieved that he was gone, quickly buried him, standing upright, as befitting his status. They were in for a shock. The very next day, Abertach appeared demanding bowls of his people's fresh blood cut from their wrists. The terrified clanspeople complied through sheer terror, but they contacted a neighboring chieftain, Cahan, or some say Cathran, and begged him to deliver them from the evil Namv Marvd. Cahan agreed to do this for his people, so he waited for Abertach and slew him, after which he buried him again standing up, but there was no keeping a good vampire down, and so the very next day there was Abertach with his empty bowl, demanding it be filled with more fresh blood from his people. Incensed, Cahan once again slew the evil creature, and again buried him in a remote grave, and again the next morning there was the blood drinker, demanding his bowl of blood. In total bewilderment, Cahan could only turn to the local saint, Eochaid, for help. "How do you kill the already dead?" they asked the saint. Eochaid listened to the story and the sorry tale and deliberated and prayed about the situation. His advice to Cahan was that as Abertach was already dead, he could not be killed again. The only way to stop him was to pierce his heart with a sword made from a yew tree, put him into the ground upside down, and cover him with ash branches and thorns. These were sacred woods to the ancient druids. When this was done, they would place a heavy stone slab over the grave, which could never be raised, otherwise Abertach would once again come looking for his bloody breakfast. Cahan followed the saint's advice, and duly impaled and interred the deadly dwarf as instructed. To this day, Abertach lies beneath his slab stone. In the Irish language, this place is called Licht Abertach, and is anglicized as Slough Tabatach, the memorial stone or monument of the dwarf. One can visit the grave, but they should beware. The local people still are wary of the site, and it has been reported that tourists have had a rather bad experience there. This story was read of typical vampires, and the stake to the heart. It was made of a specific wood, like ash or yew, and these are eternal trees, and these are meant to stop the heart. And that's where the vampire legend of the stake to the heart comes from. It's not the wood, it's the kind of tree that you use. This was the story of the Irish Vampire King at What Are You Afraid Of? Horror and Paranormal Show.
Are you haunted by shadow people in the middle of the night?
Do you secretly love all things creepy and spooky, enjoying ghost stories and horror fiction from the best storytellers?
Do you have a true ghost experience you want to share, but no one will believe you?
If yes, listen to the professionals on What Are You Afraid Of? Horror Paranormal Show Friday nights at 9 p.m. on Para X Radio and at www.whatareyouafraidofpodcast.com.
What Are You Afraid Of on Para X?
Our creepy and demented hosts are on call to provide you with all your spooky needs with true ghost stories, interviews, indie music, and new horror fiction.
We are ready to scare you.
Para X.
A series of traditional Irish ghost stories. The White Lady, read by T. Fox Dunham. At Charles Fort, near Kinsale in Ireland, roams the mysterious White Lady. The fort was built in 1667, and shortly thereafter a strict disciplinarian by the name of Colonel Warrender was put in charge. His daughter, named Wilful, fell in love and married Sir Trevor Ashurst. On the evening of their wedding day, the happy couple took a stroll along the fort battlements. Wilful spotted some beautiful flowers and expressed a desire to have them. They were halfway down the battlement wall, so a nearby sentry offered to climb down and get them for her, while her husband took over his guard duties. Sir Trevor agreed, and took the soldier's jacket and musket while the sentry went to search for a rope to use in his climb. After securing some rope, the sentry began his descent towards the flowers. Sir Trevor in the meantime had fallen asleep, when along came the governor making a spot check. He challenged who he thought was the sleeping sentry, and received no reply. Realizing the soldier had fallen asleep on duty, Colonel Warrender drew his pistol and shot him dead. The penalty for dereliction of duty. Upon inspecting the body, Colonel Warrender stood aghast. He had shot his own son-in-law dead. His daughter came running upon hearing the shot, and when she realized what had happened, threw herself off the battlements to her death. Her father, overcome with remorse, shot himself later that night. The White Lady has been spotted ever since. She was spotted by a Major Black, who saw her roaming about weeping in the early 19th century. In 1800, she was seen by two officers, a captain by the name of Marvel Hull and a Lieutenant Hartland. They were making a room-to-room inspection of the premises when they were fronted by a woman in a white dress. When she turned towards them, they were confronted with a lovely yet colorless face, before disappearing through a locked door. Later, the same officers were flung down a flight of stairs by an unknown force. Tales of Ireland. Another great show.
Yes, it was.
Featuring some great ghost stories from Ireland. Keep them coming.
Yeah, we need them.
Doing an EVP challenge.
Yes, we are. We need you guys to, use your phones, your recorders, speak to the darkness, record some kind of audio and send it to us.
Go into the cellar.
Go into the
attic at like midnight. Put your phone on record.
Wander around your house in the dark. Ask questions. Try and pull out the spirits. And if you catch anything, any kind of otherworldly audio, send it to us. We will review it, and if it's legitimate, we will showcase it.
If 10 people do this, at least one person is going to catch something.
It's a numbers game.
Yeah.
20 people do it, we'll get probably 2 or 3. So
send that in your true ghost stories to all one word, what are you afraid of, 117 at gmail.com.
That's right.
And we look forward to hearing that. Yeah. So we're closing out the show tonight.
Yes.
With one of my favorite Irish folk songs, Molly Malone, recorded for us by David Walton. It is actually a ghost story.
It's a ghost story, right.
And it's very popular. In fact, she has a statue, a bronze statue on Grafton Street, which is a series of shops in Dublin. Alice and I have been there. And I know this is a family program, so I'm going to downplay this a little bit, but it's a voluptuous statue, a full-body figured.
Little busty?
Yeah, of a woman pushing a cart. And so tourists have taken it upon themselves to go up and grab her and take pictures. And the problem is that they keep wearing away the polish.
Wow.
So the part of her chest is a bit paler than the rest of her.
It's a bit noticeable that it's being worn down.
So when you go to Ireland,
that's funny.
Leave the statues alone.
Yeah, they don't like to be touched. They just want to be left alone.
You'll disturb the spirit of Molly.
That's right.
But David does it beautifully. It's one of my favorite ghost songs. We're going to end the show tonight. We'll be back like in a week or two. We're not sure. We'll see. So we have some great material coming up.
Yeah, we do. Sometime in the next week or two, we got a special interview coming up.
I know you've been working hard on this.
Yeah, and I'm not going to, give too many details about it. But
I can tell them.
Okay.
It's Aleister Crowley.
Yes, that's right.
We actually have a medium coming in.
Yeah.
Who's going to channel Aleister Crowley.
It's going to be great. And it's not going to be phony at all.
Not at all. It's going to sound like her, but I mean, if any of you are Aleister Crowley experts, you're going to match the dialogue. It's going to be incredible.
You're going to know it's him.
Right. And then we're going to bring in FDR.
Yeah.
And we're going to find out who really killed Kennedy.
That's right.
On What Are You Afraid Of? This is Fox.
This is Phil.
A treasury of Irish ghost stories. The Lady Dressed in Grey. A certain Miss Herbie was visiting her friend, a distinguished lady in Tasmania. One day, as she was coming down the stairs to have tea with her host, she saw the figure of a cousin of hers from Dublin, who she was very close to, coming up the stairs. Without waiting to see it disappear, she ran to tell the lady what she had seen. Her host laughed at her, but told her to write down the time and place of her experience, which she did in turn. This is the gist of her note. On the 21st of April 1888, a Saturday, at 5 in the evening, I saw a vision of my cousin in a faded grey dress. In June of that same year, Miss Herbie was told of her cousin's untimely death. She died from typhus in a Dublin hospital at exactly the same time that Miss Herbie had seen her coming up the stairs. It's interesting to note that her cousin was wearing the type of dress worn by nurses in the hospital in which she died, something that Miss Herbie had no prior knowledge of. Her description of the dress, though, fitted perfectly by that of those worn by the nurses.
In Dublin's fair city, where the girls are so pretty, I first set my eyes on sweet Molly Malone, as she wheeled her wheelbarrow through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. Alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. She was a fishmonger, and shorts was no wonder, for so were her father and mother before, and they each wheeled their barrow through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. Alive, alive, oh. Alive, alive, oh. Crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. She died of a fever, and no one could save her, and that was the end of sweet Molly Malone. Now her ghost wheels her barrow through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. Alive, alive, oh. Alive, alive, oh. Crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh.
A treasury of collected Irish ghost stories. The Widow Gammon. This is one of Dublin's eeriest ghost stories, it is said. Near Monkstown, south of Dublin City, is a place called Widow Gammon's Hill. It is said that Widow Gammon's Hill is haunted by the widow's ghost. It began many years ago in a monastery that stood on the spot. This was way back in pre-Reformation days, before the 16th century, and by the time of Oliver Cromwell and his cronies, about 1649 to 50. The monks were hiding themselves in local farmhouses to avoid persecution. Unfortunately for the monks, Widow Gammon was a royalist, and she informed on them, after which they were captured and executed. After her death, it is said that the widow's spirit was seen occasionally at the exact place where Cromwell's troops has arrested the monk. One local gentleman insisted that when he saw her, she grasped his neck, leaving a burnt scar on the spot, which stayed until his death. Miss E.M. Thompson from Dunham had this to say in a letter. To a dear friend of mine who lived in Monkstown, warned us over and over again of going near Widow's Hill after midnight. He and several friends had seen her there, she said. Nearby there's an old graveyard, and one night as he and his brother were walking past, they saw the widow emerge from the fog. She locked the large iron gate and then flashed the key at them and vanished. 3 years later, she continued, The same two men saw her emerging from the ruins of an old castle in the area. She held a glimmering object which looked like a sharpened axe in one hand, and the key to the graveyard in the other. She crossed swiftly from the old castle, opened the graveyard, entered, and vanished once more. She has been seen since by others still roaming around with the axe in one hand and the key to the graveyard in the others. Collected from traditional Irish folklore, mostly written down in the public domain. These are our stories of Ireland on episode 39.
T. Fox Dunham lives in Philadelphia with his wife Allison. He's a lymphoma survivor, cancer patient, modern bard and historian. His first book, The Street Martyr, was published by Gutter Book, a major motion picture based on the book is being produced by Throughline Films. Destroying the Tangible Illusion of Reality or Searching for Andy Kaufman, a book about what it's like to be dying of cancer, was recently released from Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing, and Fox has a story in the Stargate anthology, Points of Origin, from MGM and Fandemonium Books. Mercy was recently released by Bloodbound Books. Fox is an active member of the Harvard Association. He's been published in hundreds of short stories and articles, and his motto is Wrecking Civilization, One Story at a Time.
Phil Thomas resides in the suburbs of Philadelphia and is an author and filmmaker. His screenplays have been produced into feature films such as False Face and Always from Darkness that are available in major retailers such as Best Buy and Target, as well as availability on Netflix and Amazon On Demand.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.